launching this program, the JEDI Community of Practice, is really a part of E3 Washington's JEDI Accountability to Washington State environmental education field. In the previous workshop, if you all were there, I asked you, what are some of the things that E3 Washington can do for you? How can we serve your equity journeys? And some of the stuff that you all said, I'm not gonna lie, you're gonna get if you come to this program. And so what we really wanted to do was to support the field with authentic implementation of JEDI practices, especially as it concerns organizational and institutional systems. So we really wanted to look at how do we systemize and institutionalize equity so that it just kind of plays out for us. And at this time, I will pass the mic to Ray to keep talking about this, our purpose for being here.
Sylvia. So we have been brainstorming about this for several months now, like a pretty long time, and pumping ourselves up and getting really excited about it. So I'm excited for the opportunity to share it with you all too, and invite you all to be a part of it. So what we're hoping for from this JEDI community of practice is that folks who are involved will be able to come together and learn and gain from the process kind of a set of collective problem-solving tools, and then to be able to actually practice those tools by working on authentic problems that we're experiencing in our communities. So it's really about kind of building a community of trust and support, bringing together our different experiences and bodies of expertise from our other places and communities of work, and to build that kind of cohort energy to think through some problems of practice together. And that'll involve kind of learning from facilitated kind of guided learning experiences, and then some hands-on problem solving, as well as celebrating our efforts always. And then Amy's going to share a little bit more about care in this space.
Thanks, Ray. So one of the things that was really important for us as we were moving through this process and kind of conceptualizing this was making sure that there was space to have care around the community of practice, as well as if you're doing this work in the community of practice and then moving that into your workplace, making sure that there is space to take care of yourselves, because this is hard and messy work. And that being said, just making sure that you are institutionalizing time around that to take care of yourself to move through this work. So along that lines of taking care of our community, we want to set up our group norms for today. These are a few things that we picked out early on to set some intentions for our space today. Assume no harm is intended. Acknowledge the unintentional impact of your words and actions. Be present, seek clarification, and approach this work as a learner. Expect and allow mistakes, discomfort, and non-disclosure. Recognize and look beyond limitations of your own experience. Take the lesson and leave the story. Resist the urge to rescue each other from the fear zone, which is being uncomfortable. And also, please take care of yourselves.
Thanks so much, Amy. Katie, if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So we are going to have an opportunity to do some personal kind of individual reflection, as well as conversation and problem solving today in the rest of our workshop. So to kind of get us set up for that, I wanted to offer a little bit of a framing or a container for our thinking. So what I'll share is mostly thinking about kind of the histories of environmentalism and the environmental education movements, and how those histories are showing up in our current understandings and practice of those fields as well. So looking through a historical lens and thinking about the US environmental movement, the folks that we think of traditionally as the quote unquote leaders of environmentalism in the US context, so people like John Muir or Theodore Roosevelt, were, first of all, mostly white men. Those are who we think of when we think environmental leaders. And they're also people who, if we look more closely at their personal and political histories, were often deeply racist and misogynistic, participating in different colonial histories and events, and otherwise had some beliefs and behaviors that we would think of now as deeply problematic. And so the historic foundations, not just of those people, those leaders, but also of kind of the practice of environmentalism in the US has also been really racist, misogynistic, and colonial. One of the clear examples that I often think about is how environmental movements have been part of erasing and murdering Indigenous folks and communities, as well as excluding communities of color from participating in environmental spaces. And so I think those historical factors, although we may at first think that that's like in the distant past and not as relevant anymore to our current day, those factors really are part of explaining why environmentalism as a movement, as well as environmental education as a field, is still really dominated by white folks. Kind of the gender diversity has become a little bit more inclusive over time, but the whiteness, I think, is still really prominent in our fields. And so I think part of thinking about this is thinking of what stories we tell. And so the image on the left side of this slide is from, well, the image is of John Muir, but the article headline and the article that we wanted to share is from the Sierra Club. So John Muir is an important figure, a founding figure in the Sierra Club's kind of history and mythology. But they have kind of taken a more critical lens to that history recently to think about whether they want to continue celebrating someone who had such a problematic influence in our country. So I think their statement on that is really interesting to read and think about kind of how we can tell different stories to analyze more critically what those histories mean, and then kind of make tangible changes in our organizations to address those histories. So Katie, if you wouldn't, oh, you already got it. Thank you so much. Katie shared the link to that article, and we encourage you all to check that out if you're interested. The other article, which is on the top right side of this slide, is an article in Vice written by Julian Brave Noisecat, who's an Indigenous climate activist, and talks about in more detail the different historical and current racialized injustices that happen within the environmental movement. The Katie has dropped the link to that as well. And then we also, along with kind of thinking about the harm and the violence that has been created in this space historically, we also want to think about the histories of survival and resistance and thriving that have persisted as well. So thinking about how BIPOC communities, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color, have always had ecological relationships and practices despite their kind of persistent exclusion and erasure in mainstream forms of environmentalism. So there have been movements kind of thinking about that and making that more broadly known throughout history. So thinking about like environmental justice movements and more recently climate justice movements. And one that I've been really learning from recently is the intersectional environmentalism movement. I know some of you on the call are familiar and are thought partners with me on this. And I encourage you, for those of you who haven't seen this before, to take a look at this website. They have a ton of really amazing resources about how different racial and cultural communities practice environmentalism and environmental leadership in different ways. And so I think that's a really wonderful resource in thinking about how and why we can broaden leadership opportunities within our spaces. So for today, for our remaining hour or so together, we wanted to think together about how we can foster a sense of belonging for all of the different folks in our communities, and how to, when we do that, when we think about moving toward more justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, to use an abundance mindset and think about kind of the abundance of all that we can learn and do together, rather than a more competitive or scarcity focused mindset. So we've been thinking a lot in our kind of small planning committee and in our equity committee about our different roles and responsibilities within that. So because we, with our different identities and positionalities, are all still forced to navigate these systems of white supremacy and patriarchy and colonialism, we're all kind of, we all need to engage in different ways, but we all have kind of different responsibilities or different forms of action that we can take based on those identities and positionalities. So that's kind of where we're coming from in terms of where we hope to facilitate some thinking and sharing today. So kind of thinking through all of those ideas, we wanted to offer first some time for you all to reflect individually and think about kind of how some of these histories and current issues are showing up in your communities, in your workspaces, any spaces where you kind of engage with environmentalism or environmental education. And we'll also, the individual reflection is also to kind of set you up for some shared problem solving in breakout rooms in a little bit. So we'll take maybe, how much time do we want, facilitator team? Maybe like
do an extra amount of minutes because we're kind of early.
Okay, do you want to do like 10 minutes? 10 minutes of thinking. And if you want to take a stretch break at some point during that reflection, that is more than welcome as well. So we'll take about 10 minutes to do some individual reflection. If you want to grab like a piece of paper, or you can jot down notes on your computer as well, on any JEDI related problems of practice that you notice showing up in your communities.
What we're going to do next is, you did already some reflection on some problems of practice that are showing up for you. And we want to give you this tool that's actually a problem solving template. And yes, Elizabeth, that's fine. And so before we dig into this tool, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between restorative practices and routine practices and how you can use this template for both. So as you can see, the first direction is form a circle. Circles are a very power flattening dynamic. Obviously, you can only form a circle in person. You can't form it on Zoom. But you can share an order of the names in chat, and then you can create a speaking order, which is a similar shared power dynamic. And this circle is really an important piece of either your routine or restorative practice with this, because of the way that it just helps us to share power. Now, if you're going to use this template as a restorative practice, that means that once some incident happens, this practice is used in response to that incident. If you're going to use it as a routine practice, that means every week you have a problem solving meeting and you know that there are problems, and you've set aside time for all staff to come together, or all stakeholders, or all committee members, or whomever, to just do problem solving. I think that this practice can be really strong as a restorative practice, and I think it's even stronger when it's used as a routine practice, because it puts us in the mindset that yes, problems are happening all around us, and yes, we have the power to do something about it. And so we're not pretending that things are, all happy-go-lucky all the time, and we're also not stuck thinking that we can't do anything about it. So when you use this as a routine, I recommend, number 2, opening with appreciation and/or gratitude. My recommendation to build your community would be to do really genuine appreciations, because it really makes you actually have to notice something that somebody else did during that week time that you had in between the meetings. And so you start to pay attention to the things you can appreciate people for, which helps you with community building. For the purpose of this time through, if you don't know the people in your small group when you go to practice this template, maybe just try some gratitude. It is kind of the season for gratitude, as that's sort of the November theme in Hallmark world. And so you can try gratitude if genuine appreciations won't work. And then next, you can introduce the problem. If you're going to use this as a routine practice, maybe you have an anonymous Google form or even a handwritten box that people can drop problems into. Maybe you choose one at random. Maybe you look through the list and choose one that feels the most relevant. However you choose the problem, you all will focus just on one problem of practice during this problem solving circle. And so you can read it aloud, and then you can go around the circle in your talking order. And everybody who has an idea or a wondering can share. You can share solutions. You can share questions that you think might help people start thinking about the problem in a different way. You can share your commentary. Anything that you think would be helpful toward creating a solution. You could have one person write them all down. And then after everyone's gone through once, maybe twice if folks needed to pass, they weren't ready the first time around, then you can read out all of the options, all of the ideas, and then whoever is the most impacted by the problem can actually be the person who chooses the solution. And maybe it's a small group of people that choose the solution. And this is something that you will have to build the trust and safety in your community setting. If you're going to use this practice in your own contexts, you want to build that trust and safety so that people can actually say, well, I think this problem actually impacts me the most, so I think I should say the solution. And then other people could say, well, I think it also impacts me, can I help you make the solution? And being able to have those conversations, like Ray was talking about around identity, and how that really affects how we're able to show up in various contexts. And then you can choose that once the solution's chosen, just commit to observing how it goes for the next few weeks. You can come back to it in another circle a few weeks later, or maybe you'll just really like the practice that you decide to implement. And then lastly, you want to close with connection. And when you're doing this like a routine, it's really important actually to open with those appreciations and then close with connection, because it helps us to not feel like this practice is only associated with the negative feelings of problem solving, but rather we also have some really positive feelings of camaraderie and collaboration associated with this process too. So for your connection, maybe you tell a joke, maybe you all do a physical body movement together, maybe a one-word checkout, go around the circle. It's really kind of up to you all. So as you can see, there's a lot of flexibility, but there's also a lot of structure here. So you can make it work for what's relevant for you.
Bringing us back to the main room, I want to ask how you felt about the process. So how did you feel about going through that template and that process? Anybody can share out, unmute yourself, share out. If you are done with using your voice today, that's also absolutely fine. You can put it in the chat. But I see that Cindy has her hand up.
I appreciate the structure of it. I think there's plenty of times where people come together around a problem and they just kind of, everyone throws up their hands. There's no leader. People are not sure where to start. And this does a great job of providing a place to start, somewhere to go, and a closing. So thank you.
I do appreciate the structure of just making sure each person has a time to speak, and having, holding that space for them, so that it kind of takes the pressure off. Exactly when it's going to be your turn.
I found it helpful to hear that other people had challenges and find the commonalities in the different challenges. So even though we picked one, or we each have our own situation, we were also able to find commonality, and I think that also made it easier to share. So that was my experience.
I really appreciated the section on wonderings and trying to think from different perspectives on the problem to potentially come up with a solution. It shifted my mindset a little bit, and I like that.
I appreciated the template as well, and it's a tool that I was looking for when I was talking about problems of practice last year with our informal science educator meetings, and so looking forward to sharing this out in future meetings and using it in my own work as well. Thanks.
I see that in the chat that Laura wrote, this is the format that definitely would work, not only in adult organizations, but also in students in class, with students in classrooms, especially if teachers don't have restorative justice training.
Yeah, Laura, thanks for saying that. I've actually seen kindergartners use this problem solving practice to solve problems. And the problems they solve are like, Joey is late to recess every day. How can we help him figure that out? They're not quite as big as, anti-racist organizational change, but that's super duper true. And actually, this practice, when you do implement it in the elementary setting, it gives the little ones practice in democracy, in using their voice, and in trusting that when they say something and they contribute to a problem solving practice, that means something is going to happen, which really helps them to have resilience to actually participate in democratic systems as they get older. And you don't have to trust the government per se, but if you can trust that community problem solving works, then that helps you want to show up more.
Anyone else want to share out how the process felt to you?
I'll chime in and say that just going through what we just did made me realize that I do need to talk with other people about this. I need to hear other perspective because my own is good, but I need to hear others. So that's helpful.
I see, Lena, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, something in terms of claiming, I guess, my positionalities, especially. So I'm an Indigenous Latin American of Nahua descent. So kind of navigating, working in, I think, this sector kind of as an Indigenous person, as a non-white person, and coming from, a marginalized, a colonized country, is definitely something that's a struggle. And I know something that I've frequently had is, as I'm navigating these places and engaging in these conversations and doing this work, is that so much of it often becomes sitting in a room or sitting in a meeting and tensions getting extremely high and things becoming kind of in a very kind of negative place. And I think so much of that struggle is the fact that people are not coming at it from kind of a restorative lens, a community building lens, a lens of well-being, and is still kind of occupying within that framework of kind of that, more exploitative kind of extraction of resources. And I think that this is something that is really useful, that I even found in the conversation I had in my group, that it was so much more calmer. It was something where, it was working on the well-being of everyone and really kind of coming from that place. And I think more than anything, it just kind of reinstates to me the importance of making sure that we are centering kind of, frameworks of communalism, frameworks of restorative work, and how an institution functions.
Thank you, Lena. I think so often we talk about systemic racism, or we talk about institutionalized oppression, and then it's hard for us to really imagine what it would be to institutionalize anything else. And so I appreciate you bringing in that idea that if you institutionalize this, then that's a way you are really systemizing restorative practice and in the way that it functions, which is better for everyone. So thank you.
I want to flip the question just a little bit because a few folks have already touched on this. The original question was, how did this process make you feel? I want to dive deeper into that just a little bit and ask, how did you feel in your own body in that space?
So I'm a verbal processor. I like to have someone to just chat with, and it can be 9 hours of talking and I'm still I get more energized by talking things out. So if I'm totally honest, these are really challenging for me to stop myself, and it makes me a better listener, because otherwise I just get fired up and yeah, and then this, and then this, and then this. And not intentionally to do anything other than because I'm enthusiastic about it. So I appreciate this format, even though it makes me feel a little tense because I can't always say everything I'm thinking right away and feeling right away. But that's a good thing. That's something I'm always trying to get better at because it's against my nature. So I appreciate that about the format.
Amy, this is Cindy. I was the template facilitator, and honestly, that made me a little nervous because I felt like there's this structure. I have to follow it. I have to know what the rules are. I haven't seen this before. So that made me a little nervous, but I do still appreciate the structure. I just think more practice would have felt better for me. I'll do it again with other people.
Thank you all for sharing. for me personally, the process made it feel like a safe and welcoming space. There was a different center that happened in my body in this space. And some of you touched on a little bit of that before, but it's a little bit different. It definitely felt a little different in my body and how I was coming into the space. Appreciate everybody's voices in your breakout rooms and in our debrief and share out. This time, I'm going to hand it over to Sylvia.
Thanks, Amy. Wow. Collective sigh. So yeah, good job, Cindy. I see you breathing. I see some other people's chest moving too. Some wiggling. Love it. Stay in your bodies. So that is the problem solving practice. And nice. So Ebony also shares in the chat that it was kind of an empathy building activity for her. Felt a lot more emotional and could feel everyone's struggles, even if I didn't have an idea about how to help. So you can see in this practice, there are so many different skills that you're actually able to learn and gain just by showing up and trying it out. And what's cool about it is that the practice is kind of the point. If at the end you choose a solution and you implement it and it flops, that's okay. The point is that you are, similarly to what Lena shared, you're really getting into this mindset and also an embodiment of being able to show up in these communal ways. And just doing that is actually going to disrupt some systemized oppression that exists in your institutions. So literally simply by implementing practices like this, especially if you can do them on a routine basis, maybe once a week, if that's too much, once a month, maybe every other month or something, you know, you're really disrupting that and making it happen. You really do need to talk to other people about what's going on. And the only other people that are as expert about what's going on at your org as you are is the other people at your org. It's really best done in community, and it's also best done when it's supported by the leadership in your organizations. Now, that being said, that's just not the reality for all of us. And so if you want to come and be a part of this community of practice and you're just solo dolo, you don't have an org or anything, you're welcome to be a part as well. Even if you're the only person at your entire agency that can go, you're also still welcome to be here. Yeah, I think that's everything, and we're almost at time. So, oh, wait, did we? Oh, wait. Yeah, let's share the flyer. It's so beautiful. So Leah, the person who couldn't make it, created this beautiful graphic to advertise. And that is it. So I think if anybody else has any more questions or comments, feel free to say something. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Sylvia, did you want to talk about how to join? Did you already talk about how to join the equity committee if people are interested?
You know, I didn't do that. Does anyone have the link to the volunteer interest form handy?
I do.
So,
I'll drop it.
Okay, thanks.
I'll drop it in.
So Ray kind of mentioned this earlier, but it really was a subcommittee of a few of us, namely Katie, Ray, Amy, Leah, and myself, who have been working on designing this program for several months. And we are a subcommittee of the Equity Committee. So the Equity Committee oversees all of the equity related work that E3 Washington involves itself in. One of the things we just recently started doing is collecting information about board members and what kind of equity work they're doing at their jobs. So that way we can be even more responsive to the people that we have around us as far as that work goes. So if you want to be someone who helps works on projects like this, or if you just want to get tapped in with the equity committee and, you know, be, you know, I guess more involved in what we're doing at E3 Washington, then you can fill out the form that Elizabeth dropped in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.